Thank you so much for helping out as a kettlebell judge, or maybe even as a floor umpire. This is for the format we're going to talk about is single-handed long cycle, which is typically done in a 30-minute or a 60-minute format. We're doing a 60-minute format because that's what we do for our annual charity lift. Uh, your primary responsibility is going to be helping a single lifter in the competitive division keep track of their repetitions over the entire hour. So you have to be laser focused on that lifter. You have to give your best concentration for the whole hour, and you get a wonderful little counting machine with a pretty little button on it to help you do that. At the end of the hour, you're going to use a little bit of a worksheet to put together the final stats, and it's going to be a good time. First, we're going to look into what does a good repetition look like, because believe it or not, just because somebody attempts a repetition doesn't mean that they earn that repetition. We're going to look at good first, then we're going to look at how that can go wrong, and then I'm going to leave you some final thoughts. All right, let's get into training. So let's have a look at what the definition of a long cycle is, so that you know what a good rep counts as. Then after that, we're going to have a look at a couple ways that can fall apart. So the first thing, when the whole entire set begins, the bell will be on the ground. That's the only time the bell's going to be on the ground. When the referee, or rather the head umpire, says 3, 2, 1, begin, they're going to clean that up to this. This is called the rack position. The rack position must always have a pause, no matter how fast the competitor is going. After the rack position happens, a first dip will happen, a distinct bending in the knees. The next part's going to happen very, very fast. I'm going to drive up with my legs, then drop back under the bell and lock out my elbow all at the same time. This is the second dip. From the second dip, I drive up to top fixation. From top fixation, I return back down via the rack position very, very briefly, then another swing through the legs. These are the positions that the bell has to be in the entire time. Now, let's go over that again. I'm in the rack. I have a first dip. I begin to bump up, get underneath it with a second dip. The knees must be bent a second time. The arm must be locked out. I stand up. I recover very temporarily via the rack, and then I come back to the rack again for another rest. A couple ways that this can go wrong. We can have no pause in the rack. So for example, let's say the competitor is switching, they come up and go right into another repetition. That's too quick. Instead, we have to have a brief pause here, even a very, very brief pause. So this is probably the fastest you could get away with this. Just like that. Another way that this can go wrong is you cannot have a second dip in the knees. A lot of times, people will do the first one and then push press it to the top. That's not a jerk. That's a push press. So the knees must bend once. The knees must bend a second time. Now, as far as overhead fixation goes, this is a little bit subtle, but right here, the elbow must get fixed before the second dip gets resolved to top fixation. So perhaps I get caught here. I need to resolve that elbow before I stand up. Okay? It is technically possible for people to get caught and resolve it on the way to the top. If it's very, very mild, we're not going to call that. If it's flagrant, that's a no count. Let's talk about top fixation a little bit more. It's okay if there's a little bit of wobbling happening from the shoulder. It's not okay if it's happening from the elbow. So for example, I've switched hands here. I have my pause in the rack. I have my first dip. I go up. I actually have a decent lockout there. I come up and maybe I'm having a hard time holding that position. This is okay. This is not okay. So shoulder wobbling, core wobbling, there's a good chance towards the end everybody's going to be wobbling a little bit, shaking like a leaf. This is not okay, all right? Which brings us to the primary safety issue. This is one of the main ways that people can fail out of that. For safety purposes, if a competitor is looking like they just simply cannot pull it together, I don't mind assigning one failed rep. Right? No problem. Try harder. Pull yourself together. Okay, we did what was required to correct that. That's not really a safety issue. That's just the lifter getting tired and needing to work through it. All right, so we went over pause in the rack. We went over first dip. We went over that bump into a second dip. We went over locking the elbow out prior to standing up, and then knees and elbow must be locked out. It must be recovered via the rack, cleaned again, back to the rack. All of that is necessary for it to count, but we will count the correct repetition right here at top fixation. They need only fixate for a brief moment. This is about as fast as this can go. And of course, it can go as slow as the lifter wants it to go. We're going to have a look at violations or technical fouls next. All right, so let's talk about what some of those violations could actually look like. I will use violation and technical foul pretty much interchangeably, but violation I think is the correct term. We're going to have a look first off at something that is not a violation in this denomination, and that is unlimited switches. They can even not attempt a rep and then do another switch. Because in this division, in this particular discipline, you're only wasting your own time by doing that. And because we're not allowing people to set the bell down, you don't get the option to quit the set and keep the reps that you got. So you do have to make it all the way to the end. So unlimited switches and cleans is 100% good to go. Next, touching the bell with your free hand. Touching your other hand with your free hand. This is a foul. That is also kind of unsporting. So we want to crack down on this if you see it. Right? The next foul is going to be resting the bell on the shoulders. Pretty darn unsportsmanlike. The only authorized resting position is here in the rack. The next foul, which can easily elude your attention and can easily elude the lifter's attention, is accidentally inserting an extra swing into their cycle. That is a technical foul. Try to bring it to the lifter's attention as soon as possible, because those can add up very, very quickly, and oftentimes they're not intentional. Next would be hanging the bell. So the competitor is getting tired, and they choose to rest here, or they choose to rest here, or commit the double foul of touching the bell with the free hand and hanging here. This needs to be rectified immediately. Drifting from the lifting box. We're a little tighter than average because we have just a few more lifters in a slightly more confined space than average, but it is not uncommon for people to move their feet around. That's fine. I'm not outside the limits of the box. I'm outside the limits of the box now. I should be issued a foul and warning for that. You might, out of the goodness of your judge's heart, just warn them that they're close to drifting outside of the box right here. Hey, lifter, no resting the bell on the shoulder. Please bring the bell down to the rack position immediately. Okay. Or they don't respond. Hey, lifter, no resting the bell on the shoulder. Please bring the bell back down to the rack immediately. Bring it down now or I have to issue a second foul. Okay, I'm issuing a second foul. That should happen pretty darn quickly like that. You're still here? Wonderful. Real fast, form deviations and form variations, right? We already went over the technical definition of the long cycle, which is a clean to a rack with a brief pause in the rack, to a first dip, to a bump with a second dip or bending at the knees with an arm locked out, up to top fixation, back down. That's the technical definition. There can be a lot of form variation in this. Something that could impact the interpretation of the rules is maybe somebody actually can't get their elbow perfectly straight. That's okay. But they need to not move their elbow from this position. And maybe this is the best that they can get. As long as you don't see this, that's good. That's a rep. Lifters without perfect form are only being less efficient. And over time, they're maybe not helping themselves. Okay, so bad form that meets the technical requirement is fine. You may see a bell that does that. Terrible swing. Absolutely allowed. You may see somebody who really cants to one side. Terrible form, not efficient. That's a qualified rep, and that's going to be okay. You may see somebody with shorter arms struggling in the rack. Contact with the forearm is what we're looking for. You may see somebody with a comfortable deep rack. You may see more bent knees. You may see locked out knees. It's all okay as long as we hit the technical definition of the rep. One thing that I'd like to cover real fast, you're probably going to see arm out to the side a little bit instead of by the ear. I think this is okay. However, that's not okay. In which case you need to say lifter, top fixation, or fixate. Okay, somewhere in here is all right. This is more efficient. I'm using structure. This is less efficient. I'm using muscle. I think the lifter is just hurting themselves with less than good form. If it meets the technical definition, you will still award a rep. Because of the competitive lifting division that you're judging, we do have to abide by a uniform code. Knees must be exposed. Elbows must be exposed. Closed-toed shoes must be worn at all times. And there are a few other items. Have a look at them in the rule book. These are the big ones, primarily because these are the things that can kind of change. Belt is optional. Belt does not have to be worn. Clothing must not go on top of the belt, but a little bit of incidental hanging over the belt is 100% fine. And actually it's necessary because I need to be able to raise my arms without my shirt pulling. So lifters are probably gonna have a little bit of that situation going on with the belt. If the elbow makes incidental contact with the belt, that's not a problem either. Let's have a look at a couple of strange things that you might see. So the first is you might see somebody wearing a belt just decide that, get this thing off of me. If they hit another lifter, sure, give them a foul. But that's okay. The belt is optional. They can take it off. However, if you see this unfold, that's a disqualification. Shoes are a required part of the uniform, and they must remain on the lifter at all times. The lifter has access to 3 substances during the course of lifting. This is a marathon format, and it is single bell, so we have a free hand. We can get the floor manager to bring a towel to dry off the hands. And with that free hand, you can grab a towel and you can dry your hands off. You can also get chalk from the water boy, water girl, floor manager, whatever you want to call them, and they can get chalk on their hands. Also, from floor manager, you can get water bottle, Gatorade bottle, whatever. Technically, you could get a snack too, but like that would really inhibit the performance of the lifter. You're probably not likely to see that. It's technically allowed. Okay, so we have that situation. Probably that person needs to dry off the other hand or re-chalk the other hand as well. So a switch swing, again, we have unlimited switch swings. That's not a problem for them to go ahead and execute that. You, judge, will not bring the water bottle or the chalk or the towel. Your station is to stay and count reps and monitor form. Unsportsmanlike conduct. I think we know it when we see it. You instantly want that person out of the room. So that's going to be up to you to initiate, and then probably group enforcement, right? However, somebody putting their bell down is probably the most unsportsmanlike thing that I could think of that is likely to happen, and that obviously results in a disqualification. So pretty simple. Pretty simple. All of the miscellaneous that we've gone over, all of the violations and the no repetitions and stuff, there's a place to record that. I will give you some score sheet training the day of. It's not that hard. It's more important that you understand what you're looking at. What is a good mindset to have, I think, is imagine that you are out on a safari and we're just looking at wildlife, and we see, you know, some antelope over there, and we see some elephants over there, and, you know, we see a bunch of different birds, and then all of a sudden a tiger comes across the tracks. Holy cow, that's a tiger. Yeah, you just saw one in the wild. We didn't scrutinize the elephant to prove that it wasn't a tiger. We didn't scrutinize the birds to prove that it was a tiger or not a tiger. When you saw the tiger, you knew it was a tiger, right? So when you see the obvious foul or the obvious no count repetition, you'll know it, mark it, or don't count it. In the case of a no repetition, advise the lifter. That's all you have to do. Look at what right looks like, and when it's not right, if it falls into any of the technical definitions of an error, there you have it. Other than that, just have a good time. I think that's the right mindset. Thinking about that safari, when you see a tiger, you know it when you see it. Please do send me your questions, and I can't wait to see you for our No Bell Down. Thanks, guys.